Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. Welcome to the Big Book Comes Alive Step Study Workshop number 62 of the current cycle. We're going longer than we had in the past because we're covering these so-called forgotten chapters, the wives, the family, employers, and so on. And where we are today is, in fact, in one of those chapters. We're talking about two wives. And as we mentioned last week, before I got into it, I just wanted to just cover some background. If you know me, you know that I like history, and uh, there are so many stories about this chapter, so many misunderstandings, myths, and that just are incorrect, that I'd like to just make sure we cover them. The first one, the most popular one, is that someone other than Bill Wilson wrote this. This chapter is written by Bill Wilson and Bill Wilson alone. No one else helped him with this. It is said that he had offered the authorship to Annie Smith, who is Dr. Bob's wife, because he respected her spirituality. And while he did respect her spirituality, what he offered her was a chapter that was going to be called An Alcoholic's Wife. And she declined that. So the next person who was asked to write that chapter, An Alcoholic's Wife, was Marie Bray, Bray. Her husband's story, her husband was Walter Bray, and his story is called The Backslider, and that was in the first edition. So she had a story that was the alcoholic's wife, not a wife, two wives, an alcoholic's wife in the story section, not in the regular section of the book, the first 164 pages, not the regular section, the recovery section of the book, I should say. Um, so again, Marie Bray was asked to write The Alcoholic's Wife. The person who was never asked was Lois. And Lois probably would have been the ideal person to write the book, but she would have been writing it from a different perspective than what Bill wanted to put across. What he said to her was he wanted the same voice in all of the chapters. So if the same author is writing it, it'll have the same voice. But I think he had other things in mind. He wanted to put across certain points that I don't think would have gotten done if it were written by a non-alcoholic, whether it's Lois or anybody else. And a couple of those things we're going to really get into today. The instructions that he gives just reveal that it's written by somebody other than the spouse of the alcoholic. He believed that the wife has to treat her alcoholic husband as a fragile child, that if the husband relapses, the chances are it's because of something she did or didn't do. It's really very biased that way. And if Bill would have asked somebody else to write it, it wouldn't have been written the way he wanted it written. So he wrote it himself. So just imagine Bill sitting there in a dress writing this chapter. In any case, where we are is we're on page 110, but I'm going to ask you to go back a page or two to 108 on the bottom, where he starts to describe the four categories of alcoholic husbands. And this, we already had a presentation of different types on page 20, 21, and 22, where Bill talked about the heavy drinker, the moderate drinker, the real alcoholic. Well, the description there was focused differently than the description here. And it's based on this very simple way to tell the difference. The descriptions on page 20, 21, and 22 of the alcoholic focus on whether the alcoholic could stop drinking, whether he had the ability to stop drinking. The alcoholic that's described on these pages, page 108, 9, and 10, is focusing on whether the alcoholic wants to stop. So one is focused on whether they can, the other one is, do they want to? And that's what we're looking at now, these four types. We have number one, the heavy drinker, who's a moderate drinker, a hard drinker. Um, This one is positive he can handle his liquor. Drinking is necessary in his business. I love that. I don't know any business where it's that necessary, but be that as it may, that's what he thinks. And he says some of these people, these type ones, will stop or moderate. Well, that's how we know they're not the real alcoholic. Alcoholics, us, we can't. We cannot stop. We cannot moderate. It's not up to us. And then we have husband number two is very much just also a moderate hard drinker. This is the guy who wants to want to stop. He may be a functional alcoholic, but he's absolutely still an alcoholic. Number three is the husband who has gone a little bit further than that guy before him. This guy has made the rounds of some rehabs and detoxes. He admits he can't drink like other people, but he does not see why. He doesn't see why, for one, because he doesn't know what's wrong with him. He doesn't know about the allergy and the obsession. But he's a typical alcoholic in that he needs to know why, as if it's going to make a difference. It's like if I'm driving down the highway and I run over a nail and I get a flat tire and I don't stop for about a mile or so till the traffic cuts dies down. And then before I do anything else, I go back to try and find the damn nail that's flattened my tire, as if that's going to do anything. I still have to change the tire. So this is the same situation. The guy who wants to know, well, why am I an alcoholic? As if it's going to make a difference. If it made a difference, we'd have one step. We have 12 steps because only one is concerning alcohol. So, um, and this guy wants to want to stop. He desperately wants to stop. And you could be hopeful of a situation like that because from desperation comes willingness. And then we have husband number four. Uh, this guy is the hopeless variety. He's the chronic variety. Um, Doctors may shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. And that's a line about one, two, three, four, five lines down from the beginning of the paragraph where it says, you may have a husband of whom you can despair. In the middle of the paragraph, like I said, about five lines down, is the line, doctors may shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. Well, it's not just doctors. You may want to add some things there. Doctors may do that. Lawyers may do that. Probation officers may do that. Parents, friends, hell, God himself might shake his head at the alcoholic. Well, that's what we're talking about. But there is hope because this picture may not be as dark as it looks because many of these are just as far gone and they got well. They have recovered. So we've covered the types here. Now we're on the bottom of page 110, the last paragraph, which says, let's now go back to husband number one. Oddly enough, he's often difficult to deal with. He enjoys drinking. Anyone identify with that? It stirs his imagination. His friends feel closer over a highball. Anyone identify with these things? Perhaps you enjoy drinking with him yourself when he doesn't go too far. You've passed happy evenings together chatting and drinking before your fire. Perhaps you like parties. Perhaps you both like parties, which would be dull without liquor. We've enjoyed such evenings ourselves. We had a good time. We all know about liquor as a social lubricant. This, incidentally, is a description of drinking for fun. That first stage in drinking. Remember, we talked about the first stage being drinking for fun, the second stage being to function. We are now drinking initially, we drink because we like the effect it creates. And when we drink to function, we are drinking because it lets us be what we want to be. And the third category is the worst, sickest of all, the drinking for oblivion, the seeking of oblivion. Well, we're talking very much here about the early stages that we're drinking for fun. We all know liquor is a social lubricant. Some, but not all of us, think it has its advantages. And here's a great part. You may want to underline this: when reasonably used. Um, I personally, I always went too far. I was social, maybe for the first few minutes, not even the first drink. But after that, it was blackout destination. I drank for that effect. That's why I drank. I wasn't reasonably using it at all. So the notion of reasonably using alcohol doesn't apply to at least 101 people here, I think. Top of page 111. Bill now begins to focus on telling the wife directions. That this really, more than any other part of this chapter, reveals that it's Bill who wrote this, that it's certainly not the wife, the spouse, the partner of the alcoholic who wrote this, that this is clearly written by Bill. The points of view you're about to come across wouldn't be written by Lois, just wouldn't be. So the first principle of success: you should never be angry. Now, we went through the principles of success a couple of weeks back, and that was the first principle of success in terms of how to work the third part of the 12 step. Practice these principles in all of our affairs. And the first principle was that: never be angry. But we're taking a different point of view now. We're coming at it from a direction to the spouse. So basically, we're telling the wife, let him smash up the car. Let him throw up all over your carpet. Let him hit the kids. Let him lose another job. But don't get angry. It's a bit of science fiction, I think. But that's what he's starting to say is don't get angry. Even though your husband becomes unbearable and you have to leave him temporarily, you should, if you can, go without rancor. Rancor just means hostility. Do you think that's possible? To leave as a result of him vomiting on the carpet, smashing the car, hitting the kids, losing another job? You think it's possible to leave with a smile and, okay, dear, we'll see you later? That's basically what he's saying. Patience and good temper are most necessary. They're not just important, they're musts. And that's why most necessary is highlighted in green, because we highlight musts here. But that's one of the things we have to do. Just to kind of do a flyover here, when confronted with this type of drunk, the first principle is you should never be angry, right? And then he goes on to say, and you're going to see it pretty soon, you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. Those two things, unless those two rules are strictly followed, the husband will likely consider you to be a nag or a killjoy, and then he'll use that characterization as an excuse for more drinking, during which time he may seek someone to console him. That's not always the guy sitting next to him at the bar. With this devastating threat hanging over the head of the wife, she's encouraged to initiate a frank and friendly talk about his liquor problem. And then he tells you, the wife, when you do that, be sure that you're not critical. Take it a step further. He says, put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. That's what we're about to run into. That's the thought behind all of this. So let's see the directions. Next paragraph. Our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do, right? Don't tell him about his drinking. Don't be critical of his drinking. Don't tell him he has to stop drinking. If he gets the idea that you're a nag or a killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be zero. Watch this. He will use that as an excuse to drink more, it's your fault. How's that? He'll tell you he's misunderstood. This may lead to lonely evenings for you. He may seek someone else to console him, not always another man. That guy next to him at the bar, that's not always the kind of companionship he winds up with. Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. And please, the next sentence I've got in pink because I think it's a bit of a promise. It is possible to have a full and useful life though your husband continues to drink. And I think that's probably the one truth that we've come across here so far, that you can have a full and useful life. And chances are it's going to be without that person. We know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. Once again, don't tell him what he must do about his drinking. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. Here's another promise. This first sentence is in pink. We know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow, but you'll save many a heartbreak if you can succeed in observing them. Your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. Isn't that what you want? You want the drunk to think that you're reasonable and patient. This may lay the groundwork for a friendly talk, as I mentioned before. With all of these things hanging over your head, initiate a frank and friendly talk about his drinking problem after we've already been told twice on this page not to talk about his drinking problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself. What are the odds of that happening? Be sure you're not critical during such a discussion. Attempt instead, here it is, put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. Don't tear down, build up. Again, it starts off with never being angry and never tell him what he must do, and it just keeps getting worse. Put yourself in his place. Don't be critical. Be helpful rather than critical. When a discussion does arise, you might suggest he read this book. When we started to do the Principles of Success, where we picked out the various things in these chapters that kind of tell us how to practice these principles in all of our affairs, I suggested that there's a shortcut, that you don't have to read all of those chapters. Just turn to page 112 and pay attention to the first 3 words. Read this book. That'll tell you everything. So you might suggest he read this book, or at least the chapter on alcoholism, chapter 3, more about alcoholism. Tell him you've been worried, though perhaps needlessly. You think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. It's a contradiction, I think, to tell the person to read this book and then to even think of they have the ability to stop or moderate. It just, one thing just contradicts the other. If you read this book, that chapter, doctor's opinion, there's a solution. It's clear that we don't have the ability to stop or moderate. But she's saying to express confidence that he can. Say you don't want to be a wet blanket and you only want him to take care of his health. Thus, you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. Now, we're about to go into another interesting area. What follows is kind of a strange suggestion, I think, that the alcoholic take an interest in understanding others. Read the book so he can help other drinkers. It's kind of a bizarre recommendation, right? It might move the husband closer to sobriety, but it's never clarified how that happens. He's saying that he should read the book so he can be helpful to other alcoholics, but it's not going to tell us how that undertaking will help him in any way. Just says to do it. Let's see what he says. He probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. You think? You might suggest you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Your husband may be willing to talk to one of them. Again, what is the point? If this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject. But after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting. Um, patient waiting. On page, we're going to run into it on page 115. He uses another term. He says sympathetic understanding. I think they both mean the same thing. Patient waiting, sympathetic understanding. It's a skill. And he's saying to practice that skill. But it would be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. If you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. Not if he's the real alcoholic. Suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number two. Remember, number two is the guy who want to stop. The same principles which apply to husband number one should be practiced. And I'm going to suggest you highlight the rest of this paragraph. But after his next binge, ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Don't ask that he do it for you or anyone else. Just would he like to? So he's telling you not to tell him to do it for him, for you, or for the kids. The chances are he would. Show him your copy of this book and tell him that what you found out about alcoholism. Let me stop for a minute. There's a lot of harping in this chapter on read the book, read the book. You should, he should do this with it. The significance of that is really that he's emphasizing, I think, the only solution available. There are no, when this book was written, there were two meetings in the world. In the world. There was the Akron and there was the New York meetings. That's it. So you couldn't tell him to go to a meeting. You couldn't tell him to go call a sponsor or go work with another drunk. Where is that supposed to happen? So the whole point, I think, in this chapter and the connection that he's trying to make with the book is this is the only chance of recovery is through the book. The book is the guide. The book is your answer. Read it, study it, etc. And again, we're starting to see that. He starts the page off with read the book. He's now talking about you show him your copy. Tell him what you have found out about alcoholism. Show him that as alcoholics, the writers of the book understand. And next to that, you may want to write, see page 17, common peril. Remember on page 17, we talk about the fellowship that we have shared in a common peril, which brings us together in fellowship. That is one element of the cement which binds us together. But that element in itself would never have bound us the way we are currently bound. We need the solution. We have found a common solution in which we can agree and work in brotherly and harmonious action. That's all it says on page 17. Is fellowship alone is insufficient. But these guys understand. Tell him some of the interesting stories you've read. If you think he'll be shy of a spiritual remedy, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. It's the second reference to more about alcoholism. Second one. Then perhaps he'll be interested enough to continue. If he's enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he's lukewarm or thinks he's not not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. Avoid urging him to follow our program. Don't urge him to follow the program. You're telling him to read the book. You're reading something to him. It's very confusing. But don't remind him of this after he'd been drinking. He may be angry. Sooner or later, you're likely to find him reading the book once more. How many references to reading the book have we had in the last page and a half? Several, right? Wait until repeated stumbling convinces him he must act. For the more you hurry him, the longer his recovery will be delayed. Again, it's your fault. If he stumbles, it's you did something or didn't do something. Here's another one. If you hurry him, he may relapse. His recovery will be delayed, and it's your fault. If you have a husband number 3, this is of the desperate variety. You may be in luck. Be certain he wants to stop. You can go to him with this volume, another reference to the only solution at the time, as joyfully as though you had struck oil. He may not share your enthusiasm, but he's practically sure to read the book one more time, read the book, and he may go for the program at once. If he does not, you'll probably not have to wait long. Again, you should not crowd him. Let him decide for himself. This is great. Cheerfully see him through more sprees. Cheerfully. Once again, vomits on the rug, smashes up the car, lashes out at the children, kicks the dog, loses another job. But you've got to be cheerful. It's just nonsense. In any case, I think you could see why leaving it to Lois or another real wife would not put these points across this way. And this is what Bill wanted to communicate. Cheerfully see him through more sprees. Talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. It's very similar to what we were told back on page 93 in Working with Others, where we tell the prospect about our drinking. We don't talk about recovery. We talk about our drinking. But the point of it is to get them, the prospect, to raise the issue of how did you do it. So it's a similar course here. You talk about his condition only if he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present the book, read the book, present the book, use the book. They can urge action without arousing hostility. If your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. Don't crowd him, don't arouse hostility, don't get angry. Yes, he's asking a lot, actually demanding a lot of the wife. For what it's worth, I kind of skipped over this. The middle of the page where he says, you may not share your enthusiasm. I think that's one of the key principles of success. Going back to the other time we went through this chapter, Share your enthusiasm with the newcomer, with taking a step away from the direction to the wife. This is as an alcoholic working with another alcoholic. Share your enthusiasm. Well, enthusiasm means, to me, it means to be in sync with God. En means in. Theos, Theos, is the Greek word for God. So enthusiasm means that we're in God, we're in sync with God. Um, I like to think of it as, the word namaste means the God in me connect with the God in you. Well, isn't that the same thing? I think so. In any case, um, to be inspired by God. Okay, let's get back to the actual stuff in the book. Um, Last paragraph. You would suppose that men in the fourth classification, and that's the group that he says you may completely despair of this type. The fourth classification, the chronic alcoholic, the hopeless variety, could well be quite hopeless, but that's not so. You may suppose that men in the fourth category would be quite hopeless, but that's not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. Everybody had given them up. Defeat seemed certain, yet often such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. There are exceptions. Some men have been so impaired by alcohol that they cannot stop. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. A good doctor or psychologist can tell you whether these complications are serious. Um, Let me finish the paragraph. In any event, try to have your husband read the book one more time. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm. If he is already committed to an institution, if he's in treatment, but can convince you and your doctor that he means business, give him a chance to try our method, unless the doctor thinks his mental condition too abnormal or dangerous. We make this recommendation with some confidence. For years, we have been working with alcoholics committed to institutions, and I've highlighted the rest of the paragraph. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. The majority have never returned. And I'm going to suggest you highlight the last paragraph, over highlight the last sentence rather, in pink. The power of God goes deep. God is infinite. We talked about this in the inventory, in the fear inventory, that the reason why we had our fears was over reliance on self, that we relied on our finite selves, which is limited, rather than calling in and relying upon an infinite power of our Creator, of our God, because the power of God goes deep. It's as deep as you could possibly go. It's infinite. That's pretty deep. You may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who's at large, but who should be committed. Some men can not or will not. 2, 3 weeks ago, we had a handout that listed all of the references to cannots and will nots in the book. Very simply, I believe the cannots refers to those people who are still using. Maybe they're not drinking. Maybe they're trying, I hate to say it, the California recovery method, just smoking weed. Or maybe they're just taking Valium. Whatever it is, they're not able to recover. They cannot if they're still using. The will nots, those are the don't drink and go to meetings people. Those are the, you don't need to work the steps. Just go to meetings every day, take commitments, and you'll be fine. Well, that may work for the hard drinker, the moderate drinker, but not the real alcoholic. So, nothing wrong with having those people in the fellowship. Just don't ask them to sponsor you, because it's not a life or death matter to them. It was to me, And I think it is to most of the 100 people or so who are here today. So, um, some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing is to lock them up. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. I'm going to suggest you highlight that sentence. The wives and children of men suffer horribly. So much for, well, I'm not hurting anybody, right? But not more than the men themselves. It's an interesting statement. In those days, when someone was committed to an institution, it was a pretty dismal place where they usually mingle with other insane people. Many spend years in these institutions. Today, those conditions have changed radically, considerably. I had an aunt who was quite senile and had to be committed to an asylum in Westchester. And as a kid, I remember visiting it, and it was a horrible place. It's exactly what they show in movies. This large room with people just kind of shuffling around, drooling on themselves, talking to themselves, just doing the Thorazine shuffle. It's a horrible place. So when he says that the men suffer horribly, I think that's what he's referring to. Because going into a treatment facility today, in some cases, it's like a hotel. If you can afford it, you can go to some luxury rehab places in Hawaii, in Florida, in a lot of other places, and it's almost indistinguishable from a Hilton. So in those days, they did suffer horribly when they were institutionalized. It's not the case today. But sometimes you must start life anew. Um, I think this is Bill's way of saying to the wife, you're not without options, that you have a choice, that you can still leave. You see, the hopeless alcoholic feels they have no choices. They go on to the bitter end, jails, institutions, and death. But you can leave. Makes it sound very easy, doesn't it? Well, let's see what he says. You can start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. If your husband is a drinker, you probably worry over what people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think everyone is talking about conditions in your home. You avoid the subject of drinking even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you believe a trembling you become a trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. We find obviously those calls from the hospital, from the police, and so on. We find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness. You may want to highlight that phrase, to let your friends know the nature of his, and underline or circle that last word, illness. If you're going to explain it right. That they're not, hubby isn't weak. He's not morally deficient. He's not blind. He has an illness and he just had a relapse. If he had a heart condition and then suffered another heart attack, you wouldn't be going around saying that my husband is weak and immoral. Well, it's the same thing. The same thing. So if you're going to explain it properly. In which case you have to understand it yourself. So you'd have to read the book. But you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband. Asking a lot, asking a lot. Um, When you have carefully explained to such people that he's a sick person, and I've underlined sick, you'll now have created a new atmosphere. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of, here, as I mentioned before, he's going to bring up sympathetic understanding. The same thing as we talked before on the other page. You'll no longer be conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were a weak character. Remember, he's sick. It's another way to say that. He may be anything but that. Your new courage, good nature, and lack of self consciousness will do wonders for you socially. I just think he asks a lot here. Um, it's like his focus is starting to shift. We're uh, we're we're shifting away from the husband, the alcoholic, to the wife, extolling the benefits that she can gain by following the suggestions in this book. With this new understanding of alcoholism, of the alcoholic, of the nature of the illness, she's going to be better equipped now to deal with her neighbors, her friends, children, the employer, just because she's read this book. She's going to have all of those illuminations. It's asking a lot. The same principle applies in dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it's best not to take sides in any argument. So if your husband is having difficulty with your child, you're not supposed to take sides. He has with them, not to take any argument he has with them while drinking. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. Then that terrible tension that grips the home of every problem drinker will be lessened. In one of the workshops recently, somebody suggested that that sentence should be highlighted in pink. It is a kind of a promise, if you think about it, that the terrible tension that grips the home of every drinker will be lessened if you create a better atmosphere in the home. It's the burden of creating it that I'm concerned with. It's putting it all on the wife. And there's another way to look at that. This sentence is a description of a spiritual malady, that the home is gripped in this tension. That's a spiritual malady. The home itself, everybody in it, restless, irritable, discontented. So it's an interesting statement. Frequently, you'll have felt obliged to tell your husband's employer and his friends that he was sick, when as a matter of fact, he was tight. Avoid answering these inquiries as much as you can. Whenever possible, let your husband explain. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people when they do have a right to know where he is and what he's doing. Discuss this with him when he's sober and in good spirits. Ask him what you should do if he places you in such a position. But be careful not to be resentful. Let bygones be bygones. Um, Again, don't be resentful. Don't be angry. Don't be critical. There's a lot of directions for the wife. There's another paralyzing fear. You may be afraid your husband will lose his position. You're afraid, you're thinking of the disgrace and hard times which will befall you and your children. This experience may come to you, or you may already have had it several times. Should it happen again, regard it in a different light. You may want to underline that. Regard it in a different light. Maybe it'll prove a blessing. It may convince your husband he wants to stop drinking forever. In a kind of obtuse way, that's another reference to permanent sobriety, permanent recovery, thinking that he can do that. So the book does mention that concept that it is possible. Um, and now you know that he can stop. Now you know that he can stop if he will. Time after time, this apparent calamity has been a boon to us, for it opened a path which led to the discovery of God. We have elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. Again, he's telling the spouse to apply the principles that are brought up in this book to her life. Al-Anon wasn't around at that time, but he's basically proposing Al-Anon. How much better life is lived on a spiritual plane. If God can solve the age-old riddle of alcoholism, he can solve your problem too. We wives found that, like everybody else, please highlight the rest of this paragraph, incidentally. We were afflicted with pride. Let's underline pride. Self-pity. Let's underline that. Vanity. Let's underline that. And all the things which go to make up the self-centered person. Let's underline self-centered person. And we are not above selfishness. Let's underline that. Or dishonesty. Let's underline that. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we begin to see the desirability of doing so, following the directions in this book. At first, some of us did not believe we needed this help, just like the alcoholic's denial, that the wife may feel, I don't have a problem. I don't have to change. He does. We thought on the whole we were pretty good women, capable of being nicer if our husbands stopped drinking. But it was a silly idea that we were too good to need God. Now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives. You may want to highlight that. Someone in one of the workshops suggested that that's a must. I haven't highlighted it in green, but you may want to consider it. We try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our life. Practice these principles in all your affairs. That's what the alcoholic is being told to do, and that's what you should do. When we do that, we find it solves our problems too. The ensuing lack of fear, worry, and hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. So, in the previous paragraph, he's basically describing the symptoms of the spiritual malady that the wife experiences. When he talks about pride, self-pity, vanity, selfishness, dishonesty, he's talking about the wives, not necessarily the alcoholics. So if we put those spiritual principles to work the same way the alcoholic does, the same way his defects get converted into assets, yours can as well. When we do find it solves our problems too, the ensuing lack of fear, worry, and hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. Just wanted to read a note. We urge you to try our program, for nothing will be so helpful to your husband as the radically changed attitude toward him, which God will show you how to have. That is very heavily, I think, heavily borders on quite a self-serving statement. To be helpful to your husband. Don't be angry. Don't be resentful. A lot of this stuff, I thought this was about, the spouse may think reading this, that I thought this was about the husband. Why am I being told what to do? Go along with your husband if you possibly can. If you and your husband find a solution for the pressing problem of drink, you are, of course, going to be very happy. but all problems will not be solved at once. That is a promise. So you may want to highlight that in pink. All problems will not be solved at once. Seed has started to sprout in a new soil, but growth has only begun. I'm going to suggest you highlight the rest of the paragraph, beginning with seed has started to sprout in new soil, but growth has only begun. In spite of your newfound happiness, there will be ups and downs. So the family recovers just as slowly as the alcoholic. In other words, and I've written this in the margin right next to this paragraph, time takes time. Doesn't happen overnight. I wanted to strangle the next person who told me that in the beginning. I heard that so often. Time takes time. But it's true. Continuing, many of the old problems will still be with you. This is as it should be. This is as it should be. I take as another way of saying, just accept it. Self-serving? I think so. I think so. Okay, if you and your husband find a solution for the pressing problem of, oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, all right. Going to be very happy, but all problems. Oh, I'm sorry, I was about to read the same paragraph again. I'm all right. The faith and sincerity of both you and your husband will be put to the test. These workouts should be regarded as part of your education, for thus you'll be learning to live. Let bygones be bygones once again. And the rest of this paragraph I've highlighted in pink because these are promises. You will make mistakes, but if you're in earnest, and earnest just means to be serious, to be wholehearted in something, in speech and action, incidentally. So be earnest. They will not drag you down. Instead, you will capitalize them. A better way of life will emerge when they are overcome. Some of the snags you will encounter are irritation, let's underline that, hurt feelings, let's underline that, and resentments, let's underline that. Your husband will sometimes be unreasonable, let's underline that. And you'll want to criticize, let's underline criticize. Starting from a speck on the domestic horizon, great thunderclouds of dispute may gather. These family dissensions are very dangerous, especially to your husband. Definitely self-serving. Often you must carry the burden of avoiding them or keeping them under control. It's all on the wife. Do you see what I mean? It's just putting so much responsibility on the wife that if he drinks, if he fails, if it doesn't change, it's something you did or didn't do. Never forget, and that's a must, incidentally, it's just a fancy way of saying it. Never forget that resentment is a deadly hazard to an alcoholic. We do not mean that you have to agree with your husband whenever there is an honest difference of opinion. And you may want to highlight this next paragraph, next sentence. And I would suggest highlighting it in pink, in green, because I think it's a must. And what he says is be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. It doesn't say not to disagree, but it starts to tell us how to disagree. To be able to say, like, well, I respect your opinion, but I see it differently. Or you may be right, I don't know, but there's a way to do that. In disagreeing, I think when he says not to do it in a resentful or critical spirit, obviously a resentful spirit is dragging things up from the past. What about a critical spirit? Well, when we begin sentences like you always, that's both. resentful, and critical. It's okay to disagree, not okay to be disagreeable. I think that's the summation of that sentence. It's okay for you to disagree. It's just not okay for you to be disagreeable. A lot of finger pointing at the spouse. Where are we? Okay. You and your husband will find you can dispose of serious problems easier than you can the trivial ones. This is great. The next 4 lines, actually make it the rest of the paragraph. Let's highlight it. I think this is such great advice. Next time you and he have a heated discussion, no matter what the subject, it should be the privilege of either to smile, you may want to underline that, and say, and underline this is getting serious. I'm sorry I got disturbed. Let's talk about it later. Pause when agitated or in doubt. Does that sound familiar? Well, that's pretty much what he's saying here. You're restarting the day. Let's start over. Have a do-over. If your husband is trying to live on a spiritual basis, he'll also be doing everything in his power to avoid disagreement or contention. Contention is just striving for rivalry. I spent so much of my life being contentious, just looking to be the opposite of whatever it is you expect. The best way for me to form an opinion is to get yours, and then I will disagree just to be disagreeable. And that's what contention is, to disagree just to be disagreeable. Your husband knows he owes you more than sobriety. He wants to make good, yet you must not expect too much. His way of thinking and doing are the habits of years. Let's highlight the next sentence. Patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are the watchwords. I'm going to suggest you add a few words. Remember when we were doing the flyover of these chapters, we talked about 7 spiritual principles: tolerance, compassion, patience, humility, forgiveness, goodwill, and love. And this mentions some of them. It says patience, tolerance, understanding, and love. But how about we add compassion, goodwill, forgiveness, and humility? Those are the watchwords. So if you want to be strict, what it says in the book is patience, tolerance, understanding, and love. What I hear is patience, tolerance, understanding, love, compassion, goodwill, forgiveness, humility. Show him these things in yourself, and they'll be reflected back to you from him. In one of the workshops, someone said, that's a must. I don't think so. I mean, it's saying that if you show him these things in yourself, that he's going to reflect it back. And I think that's wishful thinking. I don't think it's an absolute. Live and let live is the rule. That sentence is a must. So I've got that in green. If you both, incidentally, that patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are the watchwords, that should be highlighted in green. Sorry, I forgot to mention that, because that's a must. If they're the watchwords, those are musts. The same way live and let live is a must. In the second part of this sentence, show a willingness to remedy your own defects. That's a must. So if you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there'll be little need to criticize each other. What is that telling me? Practice humility. What are those words that I suggested adding earlier on? Patience, tolerance, understanding, love, compassion, goodwill, forgiveness, humility. How much do we have left? We've got a ways to go. I think we're going to wrap it up. Let me just get the last paragraph here. We women carry with us a picture of the ideal man, the sort of chap we would like our husbands to be. It's the most natural thing in the world, once his liquor problem is solved, that he now measure up to that cherished vision. The chances are he will not, for like yourself, he's just beginning his development. Be patient. Be patient. Again, a must. And I've highlighted that in pink and green because I think it is a must for all concerned. All right, we're going to leave it right there. We're getting into some really interesting areas. He's starting to talk about certain specific conflicts in the house and how to resolve them. It's an interesting couple of pages because he gets specific, both in the problem and the solution. So we'll talk about that next week. I'm going to turn this off and we'll open it up to the floor.